Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the Logos Project with me, Dom Dalmaso, theology and philosophy major and content creator. This show aims at taking you back in time to understand prominent thinkers, writers, and cultures. We are semi-educated amateurs here at the Logos Project who constantly strive to deepen our knowledge of the history of human thinking. You're listening to the Logos Project with Dom Dalmaso, and in today's episode, my friend Sam and I talk about the Genesis creation myth and the importance of the number 7.
So welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the seventh rendition of creation myths.
Yes.
So this one sounds like it's Dom's favorite. What's the name of this myth?
So the seventh theory. Can I throw out a disclaimer real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. All these ideas I'm getting from people like Scott Hahn, Brent Petrie, Joseph Ratzinger, N.T. Wright, even like people like Thomas Aquinas from the 13th century or Irenaeus of Lyon from the 2nd century. So none of this is original. And if you think that we're copywriting or anything like that, like, I just wanted to cite those names because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is from those people.
Smart. And we're talking about all the books specifically that we're reading out of and everything.
Yeah. I like how you forced me to say, okay, which one's that one?
Fair enough. Yeah. All right, so what's the name of this theory?
Okay, so the covenant theory or the Sabbath theory?
You really like the word covenant.
It's the key word to the Bible. If you want to understand the Jewish scriptures, the word covenant is the key that will completely unlock every single book. I guess the first thing I would say is why the number 7? Okay, so how did the Jews measure time? Moon especially, right? Because that's how you measure months. So if God creates the world through order, these Jews are going to be looking for order in the world. And how best to describe God's order in an archetypal way than by comparing God's order to the celestial bodies. And so you look up in the sky and what do you see? Patterns, right? So one thing that they notice is that the moon has 7 different phases. The number 7, it's how they express the idea of humanity being in line with the creative order of God, which is interesting because that's why God says that the world is good. Good is order. So think about the word shalom, peace, right? Peace comes from right order. If you're not in right order within yourself, you're not in shalom. Which is interesting because a common greeting of the Jews is Shabbat Shalom, which basically means may the peace of the Sabbath be with you, the order of the Sabbath in your heart. The goodness of the world is in the order of God's speech. So we have a lot of interconnecting ideas that are bouncing against each other in the Jewish mind right now. And they're all based on phenomenology. It's not like conflicting ideas.
Yeah.
More like complementary ideas because they're trying to describe something that's really intangible, right? Spiritual. The thing about the Jewish language is that it gets at different facets of an idea from very visceral human experiences, which is really interesting. The Jews are very simplistic when it comes to language, but very sophisticated when it comes to ideas. So they convey extremely deep ideas through really simple words.
Right. So you argued that the Judeo-Christian God, Yahweh, the difference in that creation story, a large difference, was that the fact that creation was described as good means there's like an innate order.
If everything is superstitious and evil, you have a reaction of fear and reverence or, distance. But when you realize that the world is not God, then there's something about it that becomes interesting. And then when you realize that it's ordered and good, then it becomes fascinating. And then you get the sciences.
All right, so we got the number 7.
So 7 means perfect reason, perfect order. It's a symbol of perfection.
What was the Hebrew word for 7 again?
Sheba. Okay, so theory 7 is interesting because what it does is it takes theory 6 and actually gives it meaning. So you remember theory 6 was God creates time, then he creates spaces, and then he creates like living places, like habitats, right? And then he populates all 3 of those. In the same time that he populates habitats with animals, this is interesting, humans are also created on that day, the 6th day, and they're both created at the same time in the image and likeness of God. So we have hierarchy. We have realms that are populated by rulers. And finally, the ultimate conclusion of that section would be that man is the steward, the king of creation, and he rules in God's stead. He's a partner with God. So now I want to look at how that narrative also explains that man is also a priest. So I'm going to be reading from Brant Petree's Introduction to the Old Testament. The combination of the verbs to work and guard, which you see is what God charges Adam to do and Eve towards the garden. That combination of those two words is not used elsewhere in the Pentateuch until the same two words are found in a description of the duties of the Levitical priests in the tabernacle in Numbers.
Does he use both those verbs?
Yes, those two verbs, those two same words. So the second level of meaning basically is that Genesis is also depicting Adam as a priestly figure, commissioned to serve in Eden, the primordial garden sanctuary. So the description of Eden is interesting because it matches the description of the tabernacle as well as the description of the temple. So when you look at the descriptions in 1 Kings as well as in Exodus of how the tabernacle and how the temple are built, you'll notice there's a lot of garden imagery in the description of those plans. Right after it describes the creation of the world, then Genesis 2 describes Eden. And so it talks about 4 rivers leaving from Eden, and it talks about gold, onyx. What it's doing is it's describing, you might say, the Holy of Holies of creation.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's
right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so Eden is like the Holy of Holies, and then the creation narrative prior to it is the temple. It gives nature a liturgical aspect. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. A sense of worship, right? So it's like all of nature is pointed towards worship. The author is basically saying that the world is God's temple, and Eden is his Holy of Holies. And who's in Eden?
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve.
The priest.
Priest kings.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another interesting aspect that I'm getting from Brant Petree in his introduction to the Old Testament. The sacred author marks this climactic moment, the revelation of the woman bride, right, Eve's creation, with a literary flourish. Significantly, as scholars have noted, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh is covenant-making language, repeated elsewhere in the Old Testament in the context of covenant-making between David and Israel. In sacred time, the Sabbath, and in sacred place, Eden, the priestly man, Adam, establishes the sacred covenant of marriage with his bride, Eve. Thus we find a convergence of covenantal, nuptial, and liturgical themes at the climax of the combined creation accounts. So basically after Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, because Genesis 2, for our audience, I think we haven't said this, is a second creation account. The 7 days don't show there, which is another reason to not believe that the world was created in 7 24-hour days, but I guess people should read the Bible. And also there's another creation myth in the Psalms, and there's no 7 days. So according to the Bible, anyway, I'm not very charitable when it comes to people being wrong. Okay, anyway. So, okay, that's the cool thing is basically you have a nuptial element to a liturgical framework where Adam is the king and the priest, and it's sacred time and sacred place. So now I want to look at Noah's Ark. Moses is told by God how to build the Ark of the Covenant, right? And then Noah is told by God how to build the Ark. So there's a lot of patterns.
Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. This is how you are to make it. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you. And of every living thing of all flesh thou shalt bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds, according to their kind, and of the animals, according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground, according to its kind. Noah did this, and he did all that God commanded him. Then the Lord said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, and 7 pairs of the birds of the air also, male and female, to keep their kind alive upon the face of the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. On that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. And the rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights.
So notice how the types of animals that are being talked about are oftentimes the same The ark, it's a microcosmic world because you have all the animals. You have 3 different places where you place the animals. Just like in the plans of the temple, you had 3 different locations where different sacrifices were offered with different kinds of animals. And also the animals that are described as clean or unclean show up in the Noah story, but this was prescribed by Leviticus way after. So we see some editing that probably happened during the Babylonian captivity once again. And then you have Noah and his family leading. But also the main similarity, which is really interesting, is when God creates the heavens and the earth, what does he do with the water? Yeah, he separates it, right? Yeah. And in the flood, when the flood goes crazy, if you reread it, even in English, it says that the waters of the deep burst forth and the windows of the heavens burst in. The water comes down from the heavens and up from the ground. So you have in the creation narrative a separation of the waters, but in the destruction narrative, a reunification of the waters. When do you see waters parting again in the story of the Pentateuch?
Oh, snap. Yeah, Moses.
Yeah. And what happens? They leave slavery behind, and they're headed towards the promised land.
Holy crap. That's crazy.
They're being reborn, right? Recreated. And so that's why the splitting of the waters in Exodus became a type of baptism. Because you die to sin, and you come out reborn, a new creation. And so the story of the flood is
no longer a slave.
Exactly, no longer a slave to sin. And the story of the flood is the same thing because God reunites the waters, and then once they separate again, a new creation and a new covenant with Noah happens. Sam just poured out my phone, and it said 707.
Oh man, coincidence?
I don't know. I think not. In Genesis 1, it says Elohim created the heavens and the earth. It says Elohim said, let there be light. Elohim said this. Elohim said that. So Elohim is the word in ancient Hebrew that designate basically deity. On the 7th day, God rests. And then after that, chapter 2 begins. God's name changes to Yahweh Elohim. So now he's no longer just a God. He's the God of Israel. He reveals his name. Yahweh means I am he who is. And that can also be translated as he who will be faithful, which, as you know, based on our previous conversations, has deep covenantal connotations. Now, the way you say oath in Hebrew is Sheba, 7. So if I make an oath to you, Sam, I am 7 myself to you. 7 is the day on which he finished establishing the world and therefore entered into communion with it through covenant. God basically says, okay, I'm blessing you, and I want you guys to do these things. Be fruitful, multiply, don't touch the tree of knowledge of good and evil, take care of the garden, and rule in my stead, right? These are all the conditions of a contract that God is making with Adam.
So God actually uses the word bless?
Yeah. Genesis 1, verse 28, it says, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it.
So yeah, that sounds very contractual to me. Kind of like you said, right? So he blessed them, and then here's the conditions. Do these things.
We have a contract here, right? A covenant, and we're tight. Adam and God are tight, because it says in Genesis also that God walks in the garden in the evening, right?
I thought you were going to say it says they're tight.
Yeah, it says, quote, and God said, Adam, we're tight. What happens? Do Adam and Eve succeed?
Yeah, they lived happily ever after. Yeah, no, they mess it up, right? Yeah. So pretty much the only thing God told them not to do, right? So there's a lot of positive commandments there. Mm-hmm. The one negative commandment, don't do this.
Yeah, exactly.
You jacked it up pretty bad.
Yeah, and what does God say to Adam and Eve after they jack it up?
Where are you?
Yes. But what I'm trying to get at is that he curses them.
Yep.
Yeah. He curses Eve in her childbearing, and Adam, also in her subjection to Adam. Once again, I'd love to do an episode on Is the Bible Misogynistic? Would be a wonderful episode. And he also curses Adam when it comes to work, toil, hardship. Yeah, and his relationship to Eve and to nature are distorted. You know how we talked about how death is the consequence of breaking a covenant?
Yeah.
Well, it says in Genesis that if they break the covenant, if they eat the fruit, they will die, right? and then God curses them, but it's death language where he talks about Adam coming from dust and going back to dust.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a really interesting argument that Aquinas makes about Adam and Eve dying on a certain level the moment they disobeyed, which that would be a whole different episode. I just wanted to show the covenantal aspects of that story. And now, this will actually link the explanation of this covenant, this initial covenant between God and Adam, is going to link the understanding of the seventh day, as well as the liturgical aspect that we've just been talking about, the temple and Eden being the Holy of Holies and Adam being the priest and all that kind of stuff. So this is the final aspect that I didn't bring up, which is that a covenant is ritually repeated. It's recommemorated for a feast day. So let's say I made a covenant with you, and we're now family, but we're neighbors also. We live next to each other. Let's say every year we'll come together as a family and have a meal and offer sacrifice, right? We're recommemorating the oath that we took. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds kind of like celebrating an anniversary almost, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the idea behind the Sabbath is that Israel is commemorating every seventh day God's oath with creation. It's interesting because it represents both that creative order and that communion through oath. The seventh theory is basically saying the world is liturgical, we are its kings and priests, and our job is to give thanks to God and to rule over creation. God creates through his word, but it's also through his word, through his oath, that he becomes family with us. So this is like a pre-incarnational theology. Christ is the word of God. When he becomes a human being, that's how God can establish his family with humanity. He's sharing in our nature. This creation narrative, it was never meant to be science. They didn't know about science at that time. Yeah. It's phenomenological, but it's also deeply theological. So we need to rule over creation, but we also need to minister for it. We are the ones that mediate between God and the world. The temple is considered sacred space. It's considered the place where heavens and earth meet. Mm-hmm. Now, if you think of earth, you think of everything under man, animals all the way down to rocks. You think of heaven, you think Elohim, the godlike creatures of the spiritual realm. Man literally is the place where heaven and earth meets, because we are spiritual and material.
Wow.
And that is all encompassed in the number 7. And so the Jews, every seventh day, remembered their role and their relationship to God. And so this is a theological explanation. It's not a scientific one. And I just find it so ridiculous for people to try to come up with scientific explanations for the 7 days. Biology and chemistry, like, these are modern ways of thinking. We need to step away from modern ways of thinking, and we need to step into the Jewish mindset, which is a phenomenological mindset and a deeply theological mindset. Now, this is what laid the foundation for Western civilization as we know it, because you talk about equality of worth, all of us being kings and priests, which is a deeply Christian idea.
Yep.
Right? And it's also talking about our responsibility towards nature, to treat it in accordance to the divine word, right? In accordance to the order of the cosmos. So, for example, if I help a plant grow in order to bear tomatoes and then use those to feed my family, I'm using the world according to Shabbat.
So you're using the world in accordance to like its purpose.
Exactly. So it's a teleological argument. So the Hebrew scriptures as a whole are deeply teleological. So the idea behind the word teleology is basically...
Yeah, I'm going to pretend I already know. No, just kidding.
You do, though.
Yeah, I do.
Telos means end, and ology, ologia, means the science of. So it's the study of purpose, basically. The Bible is a world of form and finality. Finality is purpose. Form is essence. Mm-hmm. Things have being. They are what they are. And things have purposes. They are created for a reason. And the theme of Genesis 1 is that purpose is worship. Does that make sense?
That's heavy, dude. That's awesome. Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. We are working on getting better quality conversations to you as we develop over here at the Logos Project. Don't forget you can leave a review with this podcast. It helps others to discover it. And you can support us at patreon.com/The Logos Project. LOGOS Project. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week.